Hi everyone, this is the Brown History Podcast. My name is Essen and you're listening to episode 34. Today's guest is Bangladeshi-American music producer Jai Wolf. You probably have heard his classic song Indian Summer. He's performed all around the world including Coachella, and in 2019 he released his album called The Cure to Loneliness. It's very rare to see a successful South Asian face in the music industry, so this episode is definitely a treat. Before we get started, if you're enjoying the podcast and you're enjoying the Instagram feed and you want to help out and you want to support, consider being a patron. Just visit brownhistorypodcast.com and whatever you decide to contribute will go a long way. Thank you so much for listening. Let's get started. Thank you so much. It's really cool that you guys are, meeting me here and doing this podcast with me.
Yeah, no problem. My pleasure.
I guess usually when I start with people, I usually go back to their parents and to their roots from all the way back there, the origin story, right?
Yeah.
And I understand you're from Bangladesh. Your parents
Yeah.
are from Bangladesh. And
Yeah.
you moved to the States when you were young.
Yeah.
So tell me about your parents and where are they rooted from? Where did they grow up and how did they end up meeting each other?
So my parents are from Bangladesh, and I would say that their childhood was definitely a little defined by the war with Pakistan in the 70s, because they were born in the 60s. So my dad was like a refugee in India when he was younger. My mom lived through that war when she was younger, but they both managed to survive, and our family's kind of like, well, I would say they were like maybe middle class in Bangladesh. They weren't like super poor or anything, but they also weren't wealthy at all. My dad, my dad's father, so my grandfather, really encouraged all his children to become very educated. So
Right.
he went to get his master's degree and then went on to get his PhD. And same with my mom. My mom is a family of three sisters. But her dad was very progressive and like wanted her to go to school and everything. So my mom also went to get her master's. So the way my parents met is my dad was a physics teacher at, I think, Rajshahi University.
He didn't
And
go to this is not India. This is Bangladesh.
Bangladesh, yeah, sorry. So he was a refugee in India during the war and then came back to Bangladesh and, grew up there.
So he left and he came back.
Left and came back, yeah. And my grandfather, my mom's dad, was also a teacher at Rajshahi University. He was a chemistry teacher.
Oh, wow.
My dad was teaching physics.
It's a family of teachers.
Yeah, a lot of educators in my family, actually. And so that's how they met, because my grandfather was like, hey, you should meet my daughter. She's very smart. And so, it was funny, actually. It wasn't even arranged. It was more like a meeting, because I would say my parents were the first in our families that didn't get a very traditional arranged marriage. It was like, it was through an introduction, but they actually really liked each other. And then, they got married in 1990. I was born in 91.
So she was down right away. She was like, I'm in.
Yeah, I think they liked each other. It was like seemed real, I guess. I don't know.
All right.
And then my dad got an opportunity to do his PhD in America, and my uncle, who's his older brother, was the one who was like, you need to like leave Bangladesh, like find a new life outside of there. So my uncle went to Sweden to become a doctor. And he was really pushing my dad and his siblings to immigrate. So what actually ended up happening is my dad was the only one in my family to immigrate to America, and to this day, the only one in America. So he is first in his family, then my mom followed with me. And when my mom came, I was a year old. It was in 1992. And to clarify, I was born in Bangladesh. I was born in Bangladesh, came here when I was a year old. It was supposed to be a visit. It was like 2 weeks. 2 weeks turned into 5 years. 5 years turned into we're staying here.
Wow.
So yeah, it was a big deal for them. Looking back, like to leave your whole family behind, all your friends, it's a really, really big deal for immigrants to do that. It's hard to grasp that as a kid. My thing when I was younger was like, oh, why didn't my aunts and uncles come here? I don't have my cousins? How come I don't get to see my grandparents too often? Because flying back was, it's quite expensive growing up in the 90s.
Yeah.
So, all that stuff definitely like ran through my head a lot growing up.
Did you visit back a lot?
I've been back 4 times.
I mean, as a kid, as growing up.
No, once. I went in 98 and I was
like 9 years old.
7 years old or something. Yeah. So I was born in 91. So went in 97, 98. I was really young, 6 or 7. and it was definitely mind blowing. First time back, I was like, oh, this is Bangladesh, you know, and went back in 2006, went back in 2014, and the last time I went was 2017, right before my grandfather passed. I went to go see him. But yeah, that's the origin of how my parents came to America.
That's amazing. And when your dad, it didn't seem like your dad had any family members here in America. Usually they
No,
follow a family member, but your dad, it seems
yeah,
like knew nobody, maybe some friends. So he came to
yeah,
America alone. That must have been
yeah,
a pretty terrifying experience for him.
yeah. My dad is a really smart guy. Like I think looking back, he's very much uh I know this is a bit of a problematic phrase, but I think it's the best way to describe it. It really was pull yourself up by the bootstraps. I know it's like conservative talking point and all that stuff, but it's the only way I could think of how he did it. He just did it himself. You know, when Bangladeshi people come here, they usually find and seek out other Bangladeshi family friends and alumni members and stuff like that. So there's definitely a network. But my dad just like really figured it out on his own.
What did your dad do here?
He was doing physics research. He was a researcher for a really long time. But I would say my family story was not an overnight immigrant success story or anything like that. It's different for everyone. You know,
Hmm.
I feel like I've met such a wide spectrum of immigrant families, and once you get to your teens, you start to realize that like the haves and have nots, and how it's a spectrum. And you know, you would look to some friends and you realize, oh, they're a bit more wealthier than you are. But I've had family friends come to our place and they think we were wealthy. It's such an interesting spectrum
Yeah.
of relativity. I feel like for my parents, it took almost 30 years. I'd say 20 to 25 years before they finally settled down, got a house, and all that stuff. Because we were originally in Illinois, then we moved to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and then we moved to New York 17 years ago this year. And it
Wow.
wasn't until 2011, which is 20 years after immigrating, that my parents like finally got the house that they're now settled in. And they also had to switch career paths. I mean, you know, in the 2008s, 2009s, a lot of people were losing their jobs and all that stuff. So they had to switch to medical physics, which required training, years of training, retraining, and getting qualifications, certifications, all that stuff. So that took some time. This was
Yeah.
happening while at the end of my high school slash college. So by the time they were certified, I was in college, and that's when they like bought their house. But that was a very long thing. You know, some people who come to America, they secured that in the 80s or the 90s or whatever. And those are the Brown families who have like really nice houses and all that stuff. That took us some time before they got to that point. So I feel like I've lived so many different phases of my life where I understood what it was like to be lower middle class, middle class, upper middle class, and kind of like
Yeah.
understanding that process over the past 30 years.
It sounds like there's more pressure built up on you to not mess up. I don't know if music, well, I guess I'll ask you that later about music
Yeah.
and how your parents felt. But going back, it sounds like your parents and your family were intellectual people. Was there
Yeah.
creativity? Was there arts and music in your family?
Yeah, so you know that's the thing about Bangladesh that I feel like is so central to its culture is that music and the arts are very much built in Bangladeshi Bengali
Yeah.
culture. Even if you're Bengali Indian as an ethnicity, there's just from the poetry to the music to like having people over your house and having sing-alongs and with the harmonium and everything. That was definitely a big part of growing up. My mom could play slide guitar and harmonium, and she was definitely the musical one of our family. And my dad's brother played guitar and tabla and sitar and all that stuff. So you know that is definitely a big part of growing up, being into all that kind of music. So and I played violin growing up. That was my kind of like instrument of choice. Um,
Hmm.
and yeah, so very musical household, but also
Yeah.
very intellectually forward household where there was a lot of emphasis on studies and all that. I feel like that's the typical Brown household.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, but in terms of pressure, you know, not only I guess I would be second generation, right? If
Yeah.
they were first gen, they came here, and then I came after because I wasn't even born here.
No.
Um,
Technically, you're an immigrant.
yeah, I'm technically an immigrant, and so and I don't have siblings. That's the other thing. It's a
You're an only
very
child.
I'm an only child, so there's a lot of specific kind of factors here.
Yeah.
All my cousins have siblings. It's
Yeah, it's very rare for a
two.
brown kid to be an
To
only
be,
child
I
of
know,
that
yeah,
generation.
totally, yeah. But it was the 90s and it was their first time coming here. I think they wanted to, but everyone's circumstance is different. Looking back, I don't think they would have been able to afford having a second child. And it's really interesting, like of my parents' generation, they have 3, 5, 7 siblings, whatever. And then my generation, it maxes out at 2. No one has 3, and then we're the only ones with just 1. So I definitely think a lot about why we came here, what my purpose is.
But if you're an only child and you're growing up in a predominant community in America, that must have been really tough for you. And you don't have any uncles and aunts or cousins here. That must have been a
No,
really tough time for you to kind of adjust to the world that you were brought to.
yeah, I mean, for me, yeah, what was interesting is that even though my schools were predominantly white in Illinois and Pennsylvania, my mom and dad reached out to all the Bengalis in the city who all lived in other school districts and stuff. So there'd be like 1 or 2 in every school district. And then that's how they all kind of like congregated. In Pittsburgh, there was a Bengali association that like all the families would meet, have events, cultural events on the weekends, all that stuff. So I had Bengali friends. I just didn't go to school with them. Then when I moved to New
Right.
York, it was really mind blowing because suddenly in Long Island, like there's so many Asian, South Asian, really diverse communities out there. So I was suddenly going to school with a bunch of Indian people, which I had never done my whole life when I got to high school. And but in terms of the family aspect, I was always a little bitter is a strong word, but you watch TV and the whole like hanging out with your grandparents and having a family and Thanksgiving, it's all sweet and wonderful. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I only have my mom and dad. I don't even have siblings. And so that dynamic, I felt like my whole life was a little bit missing, where like I didn't have this big family. In Long Island, it's crazy because a lot of these Indian people have immigrated here between the 80s and the 90s, and they did it so collectively. I think about how like I have friends who have so many uncles and aunts and cousins, and they're all like doctors and lawyers and engineers, and they have this second generation collective unit. And I think that's so sick. It's like what the Italians and Jewish people did like 100 years ago. They came in droves like that. And I always think about how, what am I to do next as like the only person here from my family? How do I connect with my cousins who are now, I have a cousin in Sweden, cousin in Australia. How do we
Yeah.
like kind of get together, and how do we move forward? I don't know, just like existential questions like that I think about a lot.
You're yearning for a community when you're younger. As you're now that you're older,
Yeah.
and it's easier to communicate with people
Yeah.
around the world. Have you ever tried reaching out and cultivating the relationships with your cousins and your
Yeah. We got
family
like
friends?
Facebook and WhatsApp and all that stuff. And, I'll like FaceTime with my family, and they're super proud and everything. They see everything going on. They actually follow pretty closely, which is a little embarrassing because, context is really important. I feel like, if you post certain photos or like memes or whatever, it's like, I know someone in Bangladesh is watching this. I wonder if they understand it or get why I'm posting something. I don't know. But
Yeah.
like, they're always
So you have a big fan club in Bangladesh.
I don't know about Bangladesh in general, but I know my family is like looking on Facebook and stuff.
Like if
stuff
I
like
write
that,
notable Bangladeshi-Americans on Wikipedia, your name pops up.
I always think about that. This is something that
Isn't that cool?
It's something that me and my manager talk about. Tapping into Bangladesh has been just there's definitely like a roadblock. I feel like there's not a lot of cultural flow out of Bangladesh. There's not a lot of cultural flow into Bangladesh. I don't know. I have a lot of thoughts on that.
Do you want to do something? Do you want to like go there and try to do something creative there or collaborate?
I'd love to. I don't know about collaboration, but I think that I would say this about India as well. The culture, it's very enclosed. We can transition to this topic because I have a lot to say about it actually.
Okay.
But I've noticed over the last few years, you'll see that a lot of East Asians are having this incredible renaissance right now between film and TV and music. You have Shang-Chi, you have Crazy Rich Asians, you have like Minari, like all these wonderful spectrum of films from the highest of mainstream pop culture to like indie A24 stuff happening. There's like a Michelle Yeoh film coming out next month on A24 that looks incredible. And you have in music, you have 88 Rising, you have Rich Brian and Joji and Nikki and all these people
Yeah.
who can play shows in Indonesia, Philippines, Korea, but also play like the Rose Bowl in LA and America. You have K-pop coming from Korea being popular in Japan and in America. You have J-pop coming over here. This cross-cultural flow is so fascinating and excellent to see. And I still think it's a win for any minority. I think still win.
Right.
But what I don't see happening is the same cross-cultural flow with South Asia. And I think there's a few reasons for that. One, I think culturally, South Asia, I'm talking India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal. I think that there's this conservative aura of the countries where a lot of culture that's happening within each country is kind of contained. Like if you look at East Asia, a lot of them are trying to replicate Western looks and fashion and style and all that stuff. If you look at K-pop, nothing about K-pop is like specifically Korean other than the language. The way they
Yeah.
dress is very Western. The way they dance is taking from like hip hop and modern dance styles. Whereas in India, a lot of the culture is still based on traditional and conservative roots, from the way they dress, the style of music, Bollywood, all that stuff. And you could say that Bollywood is globally popular. It is, for sure.
Mm.
But I would not say that in America it's totally penetrated. You have people like Priyanka Chopra who will come here and try to do Hollywood and stuff like that and like somewhat make their way in, but isn't really like a cultural mainstay. And
No.
then similarly, you'll have like, you have South Asian comedians, you have Hassan Minaj and Mindy Kaling, but they're not really going out to India and doing stuff out there. They're known, but they're not like doing stuff out there. So there's this kind of like cultural roadblock happening where like things from there aren't really coming here and aren't really being received by the Western audience as a whole. And then things here aren't really going there because they don't seem too interested in like the American like distillation of brown culture, I guess.
Yeah.
And I really want this to change because when I see East Asian artists succeed at such a high level, it's like, I want that for us. Like we haven't had like a Shang-Chi cultural moment. We haven't had like a crazy rich Asians. I'm not really sure why. I know people are trying really hard. In fact, the last time there was this massive brown movement in Hollywood was like Dev Patel with Slumdog Millionaire. And even that was just like, it's a Danny Boyle movie. And there's all these like,
Yeah.
and then you have, we had Kumail Nanjiani with The Big Sick. And
But that came and went.
Came and went. I really like the movie. I know there's a lot of critique because of the portrayal of Pakistani women, all valid, of course. But we don't have the wins as consistent or as saturated as the East Asian community, which again, I think is great. And I still consider that a win for any minority at the end of the day. But I've been talking to a lot of people about this. I think that by 2030, just 8 years from now, I'd like to see a shift. I'd like to see kind of the next generation take the reins and really push for it. I think it's slowly happening. And even a conversation like this, even like connecting with you and this platform, I think is a step forward as well. It's something that I've been trying to be a little bit more cognizant about over the last few years, because as my career kind of progressed, I wouldn't say we like ignored South Asian press or anything like that, but it was not something that immediately came to mind.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll stop there. So
what was the shift? When did you decide to what was the shift that made you decide to approach South Asian press?
So something I've been thinking a lot about is that in my world in electronic music, image is not sort of in the forefront. If you make decent music and you have an audience, people will come out and support and not think too hard about like what you look like or where you're from. And I think that that's why there's quite a lot of notable like East Asian, South Asian electronic artists. There's Giraffage, there's Zoo. It's not a lot, but they exist and like they've made it to a certain point in their careers. And I think for us, like, I had Indian Summer, which definitely was the jumping off point that changed my trajectory. But after that, I didn't really make any music that sounded like Indian Summer, but I was still being propelled by all my consistent releases over the years and just like touring and all that stuff. But that being said, what I noticed is that there wasn't like I didn't rely on my South Asian identity to like get me to where I was, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think while that was happening, I noticed that like there wasn't any conversation about the South Asian part. And I feel like on the spectrum, like you don't want to lean too hard into the fact that you're a certain race or an identity or whatever, because you want the art to speak for itself. But you also don't want a complete absence of it. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because there's so many ways to view this. You can play the representation card and you can play it strong. I know that sometimes you see that in Hollywood because that's kind of the buzzword right now. It's like, oh, we have an Asian movie, we have a South Asian this, and that.
Yeah.
And I totally get that. Optically, it looks great, and
Good
producers and executives,
marketing.
it's good marketing. I totally get it. But when there's a complete absence, I think that that's also a problem too, because then that's when stories or history kind of get untold. And my perspective was that, again, this is a big spectrum. For South Asian people specifically, I see a lot of Indian stories being told. I see a lot of Pakistani stories being told. I just don't see a lot of Bangladeshi stories being told. So in 2019, when I got off tour, we had done like a really good tour, like sold out every day. We're playing big venues. And I had like a moment of pause and I was like, all right, I did this. And I'm really stoked. I have fans, I have people coming out, all that stuff. But I feel like something about the story wasn't being told properly. Something about the way it was being framed was like, I felt like something was missing almost. And that's when I also realized that what was happening to me, I wanted to also happen to other people as well. Because I also realized that like there wasn't any South Asian artist who was doing what I was doing. And then it's a common phrase, it is lonely at the top. If you're the only person being in your lane, what's the point if you can't help someone else doing it too? I tried my best to like uplift as many East Asian, South Asian artists when I go on tour. I brought my friend Asim Hotel Garuda, who's a phenomenal house DJ. My friends Manila Killa, brought them on tour. I've done my best to like put people on like that. And I think in 2019, I realized I really wanted to like broaden my genre horizons in terms of paying attention to like who else is out there, who's making music, and what can I do to help them get to where I am any way I can, opening doors or connecting them with other people. Been getting on TikTok a lot and looking at like young kids who are making music and just like randomly coming across South Asian musicians of any genre and just trying to reach out to them, trying to talk to them, see what they're like doing and all that stuff, which has been really exciting. But to go back to your question, it's twofold. I reached out to press because I felt like our story wasn't being as told in the way that I wanted it to. And then two, I wanted to just meet as many people as possible to really do this dot connecting. And that's something that I felt like is in a macro large picture level lacking in the South Asian community. And this goes back to immigrating here. This actually relates to the first part of our conversation.
Yeah,
because
I was thinking that too.
What happens when you come to America? Well, the things that parents say all the time is, I was number one in my class. I was number one in my class. That's why we came here. You also have to be number one in your class. You have to get into an Ivy League school. You have to be the top in your class to get to medical school, to be the best doctor. So I could brag about it to my friends, and that applies, unfortunately, that trickles down into whatever field you go into. And even going into music, sort of in the back of your head, you have to be the best as possible. You have to be the only one, all that stuff, which I think is detrimental. I think that's something that has unfortunately kept a lot of brown people kind of separated and not collectively coming together to like win as a community. And I think
there is a lot of competition between us.
Yeah, and it's weird. It's so ingrained from childhood. Everything is a competition. Everything is like you have to be number one. It's toxic, and it takes time to really unlearn and undo and all that stuff. I think that's why in 2019, after like we had finished that tour, I was like, when I finally had that pause, I was thinking about all this stuff and how almost wrong it felt to like have done this alone. I want to see 10 more Jai Wolves. There just aren't right now. I want to, in the next 5 years, I want to see more of that. And I don't want to just see also someone with just a big hit. I want to see someone on the road, touring, playing 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 cap venues. I want more of that because I see South Asians doing that. Or sorry, East Asians doing that really well. I want to see more South Asians on the road and playing shows like that too. Sorry, that was
No,
a lot
no,
of things I
that's
just said
great.
right
That's great.
there. Yeah.
Let it out. Do you think your next music or your upcoming music projects are gonna have more South Asian related stuff? One of my questions was gonna be, how come you don't show yourself in any of your music videos? You're kind of very low key.
Yeah.
Is there a reason for that? I've been told by a lot of people who are in marketing that if I show my face on my page and if I talk about me a lot, it'll increase more because people need a face to hold on to. With your music, did you actively not show yourself?
Those are really good questions. So the first part of your question, you said,
Yeah, would
but the
are you gonna make
influence,
more
yeah,
brown stuff or more
yeah, brown stuff,
brown music? I mean, Indian
yeah,
Summer was your
was the
breakout,
only
but after
one,
that, you
yeah,
didn't really
didn't
go
really,
back to
yeah.
that.
So really good question. Something that people have frequently asked about since then, since 2015, which is crazy because that was 7 years ago. I think right now I don't have any plans to do that. I think that was something that my friend for a really long time was telling me, like, oh, you should sample Indian music in your beats or whatever. And I tried it, and I would say I just got really lucky. That being said, I'm also a big believer of never say never. If it makes
Hmm.
sense, I would love to do it. But I love all types of music. I love all types of genres. I think right now with future projects and future music that I'm working on, the answer is no. But that's something I think about a lot with South Asian music, because if your music is too brown, then if it's very South Asian, it's not white enough for white audience. If your music is too white, then it's too white for a South Asian audience.
Right.
And I think that's this thing that pigeonholes a lot of South Asian artists, unfortunately. And I don't know how we can break out of this. With East Asian people, it's weird. Like, you look at all of 88 Rising, none of them are tapping into East Asian music. They're purely East Asian based on their looks. That's it. They're making R&B, they're making pop, they're making rap, and they're being very successful at it. And it's weird. Like, when you think of R&B, pop, and rap, if you put a brown person in this mental image you have in your head, a lot of people have a hard time taking it seriously. Because when you think of a brown person, you think of, unfortunately, all these stereotypes that the Western media has sort of placed on you. There's a lot of like internalized racism also that kind of like goes into that. Sometimes I'll see an artist on TikTok earnestly upload a song, and they're South Asian, and in the comments, people will just say, like, what are you doing, bro? Like, you should be studying or something like that. Like, and it's a little sad. It's like, it's hard to really break out of that mold. But to answer your question, no at this time, but also never say never. And then in terms of me not showing my face in music videos, that's a very specific reason. I love telling stories through music videos. I grew up on MTV and Fuse, and I think that when I make a music video, to me, the emphasis is the story being told and the music. And I think I don't hide my face on like Spotify or Apple Music or anything like that, or even at my shows or when I meet fans. Like, there's definitely a higher level of mystery that you can attempt if you're an artist.
Yeah.
But I would say I'm somewhere in between of like, for the music videos, to me, I try to treat them as like works of art. And like, I feel like putting myself in the video detracts from any stories I'm trying to tell or the music itself. But that's my personal philosophy. I totally get that from a marketing perspective. Having your face shown is more relatable, and
Yeah.
I'm open to it, but it would have to be right. It would have to be the right cameo. Actually, and if you lose my mind, we shot something where I did make a cameo, and I looked at the footage. I was like, I think this would distract from the story that we were trying to tell.
Okay.
But that's another thing that relates to what I was saying before. A lot of people tell me that, like, oh, I had no idea that Jai Wolf was a South Asian person.
Yeah.
Mostly probably because I don't show my face too much.
No.
And then also, if you listen to any of my records from the last 5 years, because it's like Jai Wolf featuring a singer or an instrumental track, there's really no way to discern that I'm a South Asian person at all, unless you like click a bit more than just hitting play.
Exactly.
If you hit
Indian Summer gives it away just a bit, just enough for you to go and Google it.
Yeah, exactly, just enough. But even then, it's funny because Sarah Khan, by any chance, you know who she is?
No. Doesn't she work in your company? No.
She reached out. We hired her to do press and stuff last year to connect with people like you. And she when I met up with her, she was like, I had no idea you were brown. I thought Indian Summer was made by a white guy trying to appropriate brown music. And I was like, they exist. That's true. That is definitely a trope where, like, let's say a white producer takes like ethnic beats
There's
and
that
like
Diplo song, is there?
Diplo's done that before with like Lean On. Like they shot it in India and they had like
Yeah,
women in saris dancing in their
yeah,
music video. And he's one of the few people that I think is actually genuinely interested in global music. But it is a trope of like white producer finds obscure sample and then turns into a song or whatever. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I want more. I want the next generation to not be afraid of showing their face and being really proud of who they are and being as earnest and being themselves as possible to when they release music or market themselves or whatever. Because that's definitely something that I did think a lot about. I thought even from the name Jai Wolf, I was like, should I use my real name Sajib? Should I use something a little bit more palatable? To me, it was really important to have a South Asian element in the name. I picked Jay or Jai because it was easy to say.
yeah.
But I'm starting to see a lot of young artists start to use their actual names, which I think is phenomenal. I personally just didn't think
Well, it
Sajid
was a
was too
different time back
brandable.
then. It was a
It was,
lot
it was,
tougher, so don't be
yeah.
hard on yourself.
Totally, totally. I mean, look at Jay Sean. His name is Jay Sean. Like, it's the most palatable name. Now you have like, it's so cool to see. I have like Anik Khan is Bangladeshi and he's from New York. He's using his name. My
Yeah,
friend Rema is using her name. This girl Ashley Mehta, like her last name is Mehta. It's great. Shreya Kal, like it's cool. It's really cool to see South Asian kids like really own their names like that. I think it's great.
yeah. But it was a different time back then. So like for
Yeah,
us, it was like
yeah.
it was tough.
Well, I made a whole list too. I even considered using a white name, but I thought using a white name would create too much of an identity crisis. Like if things worked out, I became successful years later, I'd be like, oh man, they're calling me Mike or something, like Mike Wolf. you know?
Mike Wolf. Did your parents have a hard time getting used to you going into music and ditching your education
No. Well, yes and no. They were always really happy to support me playing violin and being musical
as a hobby?
as a hobby.
Okay, but now this is your future, and you're like, Mom, Dad, I want to be a musician.
Yeah. So they I think there might have been a small time where I was like, oh, I'd love to go to Juilliard or something like that. But I think I quickly gave up on that. And there was a time where I was like, oh, I'll try to do pre-med. When I got to college, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I ended up doing like media communications marketing. But that
Uh-huh.
was around the time when I interned at a management company that worked with artists. And I kind of realized that if I worked adjacent to actual musicians, I would regret it for the rest of my life. And that was kind of like a reality check for me. I told that to my parents. I told them I wanted to try music. But the problem is that in 2013, when I was graduating, my university did not let me graduate because I was missing a couple of requirements. I had all my credits, but I had to do like this like final presentation because I was in like a specialized school. And I moved home. My parents were like, there's no way you have to live with us. If you don't have a job, you're still finishing school and you're trying to do music, you have to like move back to back to our house.
Yeah.
Um,
So you were living alone in an apartment somewhere. You were in a dorm.
I was in a dorm and then I lived in an apartment for 2 years for my senior year. And
Okay.
then I moved back home, which was a little tough because like a lot of my friends moving out, they're getting real jobs. And I'm like in like just in like
Yeah.
being 22 at your parents' house was very very strange to me. Even though a lot of my friends were doing it in a save money perspective, they at
Right.
least still had jobs or going to grad school and doing all this competitive stuff. But I would say I got lucky though. I think it was within a year that things started to like take off. And once my parents saw that and they saw that there was like income, because every brown parent, it's like you have to reach a certain threshold of success before they like give their stamp of approval.
Right.
And I told
Or
myself, I
get
was like,
married.
oh yeah, that too, yeah. And so I was like, for my first New York City headline and sold out show, I'll invite my parents so they can see what this is all about. So that was 2015. We played Rough Trade in Brooklyn and sold it out, had my parents come out. So now they come out to every single show that I play in New York City. They've come out to Bowery Ballroom, Terminal 5, Brooklyn Mirage. Like, they're always there supporting.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, but
cool.
your concerts are like big crowds, festivals. Those are
Yeah,
those are some big parties that they have to go to
yeah,
and see you.
yeah. I always have a very specific, like, I'm texting with my tour manager and the venue people. I tell them like exactly when my parents are showing up, get them escorted into the safest part of the venue where they'll not be bothered by other people. Which sometimes, like, fans will be like, "Oh, you're Sajeeb's parents,"
That's
and
so
try
funny.
to, yeah, because it's like two old brown
Yeah.
people like in a crowd of young people. They're gonna stand out. But I think now there's usually like really, like when we did Terminal 5 in 2019, they had like literally an entire balcony space to themselves, and no one could bother them. But I make sure that they're like not going through like the depths of the crowd. I make sure they have someone like escort them and all that stuff, and they get it. I would say they're definitely a bit more understanding than most brown parents. But if I would say that it's because once they saw the money, they were like, we get it, like 7 years ago. I think that if the struggle continued for 3 or 4 more years, they might have reacted differently. I know every parents are different, but I don't know. Even being an only child, when you have two kids, the probability is split between the two. If one of them becomes successful, that's great. If the other one doesn't, all right, that's the one that didn't become successful.
Yeah.
They'll be disappointed, but at least the other one did. But if you have one kid, you're putting all your eggs in that basket. So I feel like in their minds, they're like, man, we came all this way here. Like, he's got to make something of himself. So
That's so funny. Are you a Muslim by any chance? Are your parents Muslim or Hindu?
it's a
I don't know
good
if that's
question.
I don't know if that's a personal question or not.
That's
If
not a
it is,
personal question.
yeah,
So
because my
you're,
follow-up question would be 9/11.
yeah.
So I kind of
Oh
want to know.
yeah.
So I want to talk about what your faith is and what do you
Yeah.
practice.
Yeah, well, we come from a Muslim majority country, but my parents are actually Hindu,
Right.
which keeps adding to all these layers, man. We're
Yeah.
basically a
Which
minority
is
of a minority.
which was why I guess why your dad left the country to India for safety because they were killing Hindus there.
They were, yeah. That is something that wasn't the main reason, but that's actually why my uncle left, because my uncle was a doctor and he was being discriminated against in the hospital. And he's like, I need to
Yeah.
just leave.
They always take the
Um,
elite out first.
yeah. They were. There was the targeted kind of genocide in the 70s, but by the time it was the 90s, and by the time Bangladesh was an independent country, there was still like a lot of just religious
Discrimination.
discrimination happening in
I
the
see.
country. Which I don't harbor any. I have Pakistani friends, I have Muslim friends. I don't harbor that stuff. Doesn't come to me, But I grew up Hindu, went to temple, all that stuff. I personally don't identify now. I would say I lean more atheist, but I am open to a lot of the concepts and teachings and all that stuff. I went to like some religious classes growing up, but I entertain the idea of reincarnation, and I think Hinduism is like a beautiful religion. My
Hmm.
mom still practices it pretty every day. My dad is kind of like moderately religious, I guess. He's not like praying every day like my mom does, but um yeah,
He's
that
he's
that's part.
culturally Hindu.
He's culturally Hindu, yeah. But I wouldn't say he's atheist though. I feel like that's
Okay.
pretty hammered in if you grew up in the 60s.
How did 9/11 affect you? I mean, you were already a lonely kid.
Yeah. 9/11 was weird, man. That just affected every brown person, no
Yeah.
matter Middle Eastern, Indian, Pakistan, Hindu, Muslim, doesn't matter. If you had brown skin, that was a weird time. I would say you live so. You were born in the 80s. Are you Gen
Nah,
X?
87.
87? Okay. So you're like elder millennial
Yeah, I guess.
or just millennial.
Yeah, I'm elder millennial. I think yeah, elder millennial. That's a good way of saying it.
Yeah. So, like, you were in middle
Grade
school.
7, I think, grade 8
Yeah,
when that
I was
happened.
in I was in grade 5, and before that, apparently I was a very social and like fun-loving child. I switched schools right after 9/11, so I think the combination of switching schools and being the only brown
Oof.
person,
Ouch.
it definitely was hard to make friends. I had friends, but like they- it's hard to explain. I definitely was bullied a lot, all that stuff. There was some light racism here and there, and I did, looking back though, I went to a summer camp once. It was like a YMCA or something, and like all the faculty treated me really
Oof.
strangely. And I didn't, you don't realize that as a kid. You start to question if something's actually wrong with you, you know?
Yeah, 100%.
Um, Definitely a lot of internalized stuff that had to be like reworked
Unpacked.
later, unpacked. Yeah. Still even to this
I
day,
don't think it ever goes away. I
it
don't think
really
it ever goes
doesn't.
away. Yeah.
It really doesn't. But I will say I think that is why I think when people meet me, I think it's very quick to realize that I'm whitewashed, quote unquote. I think if you put me in a lineup of like your stereotypical brown dude, I
Yeah, but
would
you're
not
not
fit in the
whitewashed. I mean,
lineup.
you know the language, you
Right.
listen to the music,
Yeah.
you understand the history of your country.
Right. I guess there's levels to it. I think because I had a very strong Bangladeshi upbringing and I do speak Bengali very fluently,
Yeah,
that definitely offsets a lot of my personal cultural
exactly.
interests. But I think for me, what it was that I had a lot of Western culture was withheld from me for a really long time. My parents were very strict, or my mom was really strict, and so once I discovered pop culture and I discovered Western culture, I like it completely immersed myself in it. But that was something that like I think now a lot of people, because they didn't grow up with a lot of South Asian, like I have friends who don't speak their home language, or you know they didn't grow up with it. Now they're like discovering it and they're kind of like shifting back. I think for me, because I grew up with it, I then was like, oh, I'm more interested into Western stuff now.
That's
But
fair.
for everyone, it's a different balance. It's
Right.
the whole dual identity thing and all that stuff. By whitewashed, I think I mean by like whatever your expectation of your stereotypical millennial brown person is. It's, I would say I veer different from all that. I don't know.
Do you find it
Um,
hard to fit in into a party of brown people or a community of brown people? I find
like
I,
it,
I find it's very hard for me to fit in to that community. But on one-on-one basis, I'm good. But when
yeah.
if it's a bunch of people telling jokes and things like that, I don't feel
I
comfortable.
I have a very specific take about this. My close circle of friends, all races. I have a lot of brown close friends, Asian close friends, white close friends. My high school friends, they're all ethnic and Asian and brown and South Asian. Um, but there's a difference between that and having a very specifically only brown South Asian circle of friends, which I have a hard time relating to. I do think that a lot of South Asian friend groups can be almost circle jerky. I don't know how else to explain that, but that's the only word that comes to mind. This relates back to everything I said about South Asian culture and why it's almost held back. I think the the circle jerk nature of where it's so confined in a circle makes it hard for the culture to progress forward. You could see that on Instagram, you could see it on TikTok, and like I feel like by holding on to that, it's not allowing for evolution or a cultural shift or anything like that. Even like sometimes the comedy, when you look at comedians or stand up, you'll see the same jokes recycled. And I think what's most fascinating is that if you're someone who grew up with Gen X culture filtered into you, you'll see like repeated jokes across the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, and now. I see a joke on TikTok where a kid is talking about his personal home experience with his brown family. And I'm like, I've heard this before, like so many different times. It still exists today. And that's the
Yeah.
kind of thing that I think really holds us back culturally. You look at East Asians and everything that they're involved with, fashion, music, design, is really pushing everything forward.
It's original.
Um, it's original, yeah, and like that's exciting. Even with like the movies coming out, I love everything they're doing, man. Just like it's a, like I said, my thing is I'm always happy to see it. I always see it as a win, and I look at that and I'm like, we should be doing stuff like that too. We should have original stories where we have like a brown lead, and it's not just Dev Patel recycled into a role. You know, I love Dev Patel, but like get someone new. Who's the new hot brown talent? Who's the new Simu Liu of South Asia? You know, I want to see that person succeed. Um, But yeah, I don't know. I say this out of love. I say this out of wanting to see our culture really be more than just, oh, the CEO of Pepsi is a South Asian person. Oh, like this, we have an entire generation of doctors, blah, 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 blah. Like we can be such a cultural powerhouse. There's so much potential. If we
Hmm.
really put our minds together, if we really connect and really just get rid of the toxic, there can only be one, I need to be the best. If we like get rid of those elements, there's so much potential that we can achieve by just coming together and even just having a conversation like this. I my mission statement after Jai Wolf reaches its inevitable end is I want to see more of me. I want to see 10 of me. I want to see people go where I can't even go. I want to see people go even higher. One way I phrase this is like I want to see like a brown Justin Bieber. I want to see a pop star who's a brown person. Because we got Jay Sean, but he
Hmm.
just he didn't really go as far as he could have gone. I really think he could have been like a Jason Derulo type, and just
Hmm.
make pop bangers. Then we have Nav. Nav is someone who like my thing about Nav is that brown people love to like give their cosign, but brown people weren't the ones to uplift him. It was The Weeknd and
That's
XO,
true.
and
That's true.
he became it was. And this goes back to my parents. They're like, we will support you after you reach a certain threshold of success and income. And with Nav, no brown person could claim that they were there at the beginning of Nav's career. It's like after he reached a certain level of
Yeah.
mainstream success, all these brown people are like, ooh, we fuck with Nav. Doja Cat, same thing. When they found out that Doja Cat was part Tamil, all I saw on TikTok was like, yo, she's one of us. None of these kids were there when Doja Cat was on SoundCloud 6 years ago, dropping tracks. It's
Right.
like
Right.
after the fact that she's got multiple Billboard Hot 100 hits. Oh, she's part Tamil. I'm Team Doja now. That kind of thing is that kind of the way they consume culture after a certain threshold of success is so bizarre to me. But I want to see that change. I want to see people come together and support and uplift this next generation from the start and not just like after they reach a certain level. And this goes back to 2019 and why I wanted to do more dot connecting. Because what I realized was that I was being uplifted by a diverse community of people. If you come to a show, you will see East Asian, South Asian, Black, brown, white, Hispanic. You'll see a lot of different races at my shows, and it's something that I'm very prideful of. But I would not say that the South Asian community single-handedly uplifted me.
Hmm.
Not saying that that should have happened, but I want to see that happen to like the next generation. I want to see the next like hot shot artist be truly uplifted like that, and then I want to see them supporting them when they do their first headline shows, when they're playing 100 cap rooms, 500 cap rooms, 1,000 cap rooms. I want to see my friends Memba, who are Ishan and Will. Ishan is Indian and Will is white. They have this phenomenal electronic project called Memba. And I took them on tour a couple years ago. I found them out because they were also releasing music through Odessa's label. And it's the
Hmm.
same record label where I released Indian Summer. Such nice guys, phenomenal producers. I got to see them a few weeks ago at um, a venue in Brooklyn. I'm totally blanking on the name. The show was incredible. But on top of the show being incredible, the audience was majority South Asian. It was so cool to see
Hmm.
walking in and like seeing that South Asian people had shown an interest in this group and being there for them. And it just like brought so much joy to me. I was like, this is clearly a step in the right direction. It was so cool to see. Remember, I feel like their branding is also quite mysterious online, but if you listen to their music, you can tell that they're influenced by a lot of Indian music. And the way I see it, it's like if you want more Indian summer type stuff, listen to Memba because they're really taking it to that level of fusion between Indian influence and like Western EDM and all that stuff. And I want to see more of that. I want to see these all these upcoming singers and artists and rappers do the same thing. Like I actually got lunch with Anik Khan last month in Queens. Took me to this like Brazilian barbecue place that he goes to. Such
Yeah.
a nice guy. He was telling me about he just sold out Bowery Ballroom and went on tour and like played in London and was telling me about his experience and so exciting to hear. Selling out Bowery Ballroom in New York City is like it's a very, very like it's an iconic New York City venue. So it's a big deal. And I was really happy to hear that. I was out of town when he did the show, but I wanted to know how he felt about it and all that stuff. And Yeah, just
Do you
I want more of this.
do you think that's your purpose? Do you think that this is the purpose that you want to do? Because to be technically, you're kind of a senior in the music industry within the South Asian community because you reached success a while ago, and now you have all these new people coming up. So you're kind of
Yeah.
you're young, but you're kind of ahead of everybody.
Yeah. At this
So
point, yeah, senior is a good word, which is funny. I'm 30. I still
yeah,
feel like there's some things I'd like to do before I tap
yeah.
out, but there is the
But
inevitable
you've
tap
reached a
out.
pretty big success. You've reached high success. Like you've done a
Right.
lot,
Right. And
and
right.
yeah,
No, I totally agree. To me, I would love to, in the back half of my life, transition into a mentor role where I work with young, upcoming South Asian artists and take them to where they need to go, whatever goals and hopes and dreams that they aspire to. I would like to be there for them and help them out. Because I didn't really have anyone like that. I had myself and my manager. We kind of like worked really hard together to get to where we are today, but there was no like roadmap.
hmm
And again, this is another reason why I reached out, because we were building the roadmap. We were following kind of an existing pathway that white artists had done prior, but no
yeah,
brown artists had ever done. Like, there's definitely a wide spectrum of what you can do. I think Nav has had incredible streaming success that I haven't personally reached yet. He has plaques and all that stuff. But what Nav lacks in touring, I feel like that's kind of where I really succeeded at, where I was playing shows and venues that other South Asian artists hadn't necessarily reached yet. So I feel like in the touring world and in terms of that aspect, I have quite a lot of knowledge. I would say I don't have what Nav has in terms of he's just releasing hits on hits on hits on hits.
yeah,
And those are two different types of success. I want to see someone who gets to have both, who has like 100 millions of streams on every song, but also selling out like crazy venues. Um, and in terms of reaching out, that's and telling the story. That was another reason why I was like, the story needs to be told somehow. And then once our story is done, I would like for that story to continue with other artists and to see where they can go. Because like I said, it's unlimited potential. This world is for the taking for them, and I want to see Gen Z artists, kids who were born in the late 90s or 2000s become icons. They have the potential to this. It's in them. They just really need to tap into it, and they need to have a network to support them. And that network requires a few things. To become successful, so many factors have to be working at the same time. Not only do you need to have like industry executives believing in you, managers, agents, label, that are unfortunately predominantly white, you also need to have an audience that really connects to what you're doing and to engage them. And I think that one of the things that the South Asian community lacks is that engagement. Like I said before, it takes a certain level of success before the South Asian community is like, we're on board for this. And they need to really understand that they should be on board earlier. How do you do that? Well, I think the kids are doing it really well. I've been talking to a lot of younger artists, and I could see that there is a shift happening. I
hmm
think one of the reasons why in Gen X and millennials, 80s, 90s, early 2000s, you didn't really see that is that when people immigrate here, we are on a one-track mind. We have to get our degrees, we have to get our higher education, we have to get a job, we have to get married.
hmm
If you're doing all that stuff, none of the money that you have is really going towards supporting artists or entertainment in that form. Entertainment is usually going out, getting a drink, going on dates, whatever, going to like cultural functions, which is fine. But I do think that the lack of that kind of consumer behavior of supporting the arts or music uh, led to why there's quite a disparity now between like East Asian success and South Asian success. You go to a concert, you go to a festival, you'll see so many East Asian people there. You go to a rave, you'll see a lot of East Asian people there. A lot of that comes down to how the family dynamic works, where like South Asians are a little bit more docile and like ready to listen to their parents.
yeah,
And they rebel in different ways. I totally understand, like, you get the curfew and all that stuff, but East Asians are more willing to adopt to Western values quicker. I mean, even look at their names. That's a big one right there. When they come to America, they get Christian names, even if they aren't really Christian. Whereas like South Asian names to this day, even being 30, are anyone having kids now are naming their children South Asian names. And that's a big part of it too. It's a really small detail, but I think that's still part of this larger narrative of how East Asians have adopted a lot of Western ideals and South Asians are somewhat conservative in their general life approach, which isn't a bad thing, but
Mm-hmm.
that has led to why the music landscape looks like this right now and why there's like one of me, but 10 of East Asian artists or whatever.
What advice would you want to give to people listening who are in the music, who are trying to make it into the music world?
Um,
You probably get this a lot.
yeah, no, it's a good question because I think about this. It's really just persistence, man. It's
Don't give
really
up.
yeah, I know it might be a cliched answer, but it truly is. I think I've been in music long enough where I've seen people tap out. It is an industry that will really chew you up and spit you out. I've felt burnt out so many times, and even through COVID, I have thought like, is this worth it? Is it worth continuing? All that stuff. It's stuff that like no matter where you are artistically, it goes through your head. I would say that if you are a young, aspiring South Asian artist or of any minority, however you identify, persistence is key. It's just waking up every day and being ready to do what you love to do and like holding on to that light, and that flame of what
Yeah.
what ignites you basically. Because sometimes that can, dim and feel dark on some days. But what will continue to keep you going is you have to like self-motivate and have like endurance and persistence. Those are kind of the two things. And I would say the people who have like lasted that long in the music world have only lasted that long because of those traits. Um, and yeah, just hang in there and be yourself. Be yourself at the end of the day. That's the other thing because people love raw earnesty and not like they don't like
Authentic.
authentic. Yeah, that's the word that keeps escaping me.
Yeah.
Authentic and earnesty. They love those traits. So be yourself and keep at it.
Let's talk about loneliness because that's the name of your album, The Cure for
Yeah,
Loneliness. So
yeah,
I started this Instagram account, um, and I think it was like my subconscious trying to yearn for a community,
yeah,
right? Just like you, I guess I was a lot lonely when I was a kid,
yeah,
and this was like my attempt to, grab onto something. And now that I've got this big community of followers on my page, that loneliness feeling doesn't go away. Like I'm just like I still feel as an outsider.
yeah.
You kind of went through the same thing. You felt you were yearning for a community, and now you've reached success, and you are now invited to all these. You are the host of the parties of massive amount of people. Do you, and you kind of mentioned it's lonely at the top. Do you still suffer from that loneliness?
Oh man, that's a really good question because the album definitely touches upon like attempting to be comfortable with it and dealing with that and accepting that that's a part of life.
Yeah.
Uh, I think it comes and goes. I think that can come in so many different shapes and forms. Obviously, with COVID, which is funny because it was the year after that the album came out. It was like hitting really hard, of course, being quarantined and all that. It's actually one of the reasons why I moved to Texas for 9 months because I had a lot of friends down there and I lived with like two roommates, slightly less lonely
Okay.
situation. Um, Man, there's just so many so many different levels to this because yeah, like I guess career wise, yes, like I have my friends, but I would like to see more South Asians reach the success that I have. In terms of like my personal life, it comes and goes. It's winter in New York and it's like really cold, and like I would say a lot of people definitely feel really lonely around this time in New York City when it's cold and like
Yeah,
can't really
but
go
those
out.
are those are the average people.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
you're not, you're kind of different in the sense that you are surrounded by people. Your work requires you to be surrounded by people,
right.
and at the same time, I guess for me, if I tell someone I'm an engineer, it's not like it's gonna get people attracted to me, especially
Yeah,
girls. But if I were
yeah.
to say I'm Jay Wolf and I'm a DJ and this is my show, people are gonna jump on to me and girls are gonna come to me. So with you have this kind of power where you could mingle with a lot of people and you have a lot of connections. Does the loneliness kind of, I don't know what I'm asking. Does the loneliness escalate because of that? Or does it go away? Does that make
That's a good
sense?
kind of, yeah. I mean, I feel like just meeting people, like loneliness, like it doesn't matter. Like I think the way I see it is that like you could be surrounded by, you could be at a party and you could be having fun. You could be like surrounded by 50 people and still feel
True.
lonely, you know? And I think that's just quintessential how I feel a lot of times. Like I could be at a show and I could be feeling a certain way, but I have to put on the show. I have to put on this act. I have to like make sure that the crowd is having a great time and that they are getting their money's worth when they come to the show. That's actually something that someone I toured with last fall was telling me a lot about. His name is Porter Robinson, and he would every night put in like not even 100%. He would put in like 1,000% of his
Mm-hmm.
being into every show. He's singing, he's playing grand piano, he's doing electronic stuff. It was so phenomenal. And I was doing an opening set. I was playing 45 minutes, and he was playing an hour 45 minutes, nearly a 2 hour set. It was so phenomenal to see every night. It was like a almost like a 40-day tour. And I asked him, I was like, dude, like, aren't you like tired some days? Like, how do you do this? And he like, it was his first solo tour in 7 years. So I think for him, he was like, listen, like these fans are, it's either their first concert or they're huge fans. They've seen me multiple times or they're paying a lot of money for this. Like I have to put on the best show possible, no matter how I'm feeling, no matter if I'm sick, which he was in the San Diego date, the last day of tour, he was like deathly sick, not COVID. He had like the something. I don't know what it
Mm-hmm.
was, but he was so sick. He still put his all in. So in relations to loneliness, if you want to like link that to depression or feeling sad or whatever, like it doesn't matter if you're surrounded by people, like those are still valid feelings that you'll have. I don't think it goes away necessarily. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's just a part of being a human being. And I think that even being an artist, like it's good to feel these normal feelings. Like you've said that like the average person feels this. Do you also feel this? Of course. I'm a normal person at the end of the day.
Yeah,
It's
but
actually some,
is it escalate? Does it amplify?
I would say yes, I would say I feel two extremes. And in fact, like it being who I am doesn't lessen it. In fact, it almost increases it because I
Right.
think sometimes being on a stage where you perform for an hour to going back to your hotel room, being by yourself, or going back home to where I live by myself is two extremes. It's like one is like the highest adrenaline you will ever feel that no drug can ever match,
Mm-hmm.
to where it's almost a spiritual feeling to like being absolutely by yourself alone with your thoughts, sometimes almost in immediate succession. You play the show, you go back to your hotel room, you're just alone, you're going to sleep because you got a flight at 6 a.m. the next day.
That's rough.
Like those are, yeah,
Two
it's like those are
extremes. Yeah.
two very, very extremes. That was definitely the inspiration for the album. That's kind of how Lose My Mind was written, where I was in the midst of an American, Asia, India, Australia tour, and like in the middle of that, I flew down to Nashville to work with Mr. Gabriel, my friend Gabe, who wrote the song with me, and kind of like took all my frustrations and turned into this amazing song that I'm super proud of. And that kind of shaped the rest of the record. And doesn't go away. In fact, I feel like I'm feeling that pretty quite intensely now over the past like month or so.
Yeah.
But that's a part of life, man. That's how you learn from it, you grow from it, and it comes and goes. It's not permanent. No feeling is ever permanent, ever.
True.
Like you'll never feel lonely for forever, but you also not feel the opposite of that forever. And I think
Guess
that's a good thing.
guess be optimistic, be hopeful.
Yeah.
All right. I guess my last question would be, what's it like? Like, that world of, fame and money and people, fans and parties and Diplo and I don't know what. How's that
I
world?
Man, it's not what people think it is. I'll tell you that. It's not, you go on Instagram and everything is so superficial with like how people like me lead their lives and whatever people like to flex on Instagram. I would say I'm quite low key with my lifestyle and all that stuff. I don't really like post anything about that online. it's fun to do the show. I love being on stage. I love performing. That's definitely my personal bread and butter. I love that like people connect to the music and come out and support, and I'm very thankful for that. But beyond that, like the I don't drive a sports car or live in a fancy mansion or anything like
You
that.
have a
Like
cat.
I have a
You're a
cat.
cat person.
I'm a cat person. I got the cat on my hat right
Yeah,
now.
I saw.
Yeah. So like, for me, man, and I've been telling a lot of people this actually now that I've been home for 2 months. Like when I'm off tour, when I'm by myself, I love being Sajeeb, man. That's the type of thing that like I've been trying to like tap into a bit more and trying to be more like a normal person. I don't live in Los Angeles. I have a lot of love for LA. Anyone listening, I'm not trying to disparage
I think
Los
they
Angeles.
understand. I think they know.
Yeah, it's not the OGs who live there. It's the people who move to LA. LA can be a place where like if you want that lifestyle, if you want that Hollywood glitz glam lifestyle, you really can tap into it out there. Um, but yeah, dude, I don't like mingle with like influencers or anything like that. I don't
Yeah, yeah.
like, I don't I I don't know. I live a normal life. Like my parents come visit me, we hang out. Like I'm friends with all my high school friends. Um, and I like being here. I like being near my parents. They're 45 minutes away. I like being friends with my high school friends because all of that keeps me as Sajib as possible, Um, but like I said, it's not all that as it's like made to look on
Hmm.
online or anything like that. I still think that like being an artist and being serious about what you do still takes a lot of sometimes it'll take the life out of you too, to be, if I can be very candid, like you really have to work hard for it. It's not something that necessarily will just come to you automatically. A lot of people will reach stages of burnout once they reach a certain level of success. That's a real thing too, like the glitz and glam is just the thing that hides all that stuff, but it is, I don't want to call it a struggle or a burden or anything like that, because it's the life I signed up for, but it
Right.
is still a lot of hard work,
A lot of responsibility.
a lot of responsibility. And for anyone listening who is like trying to be an artist, like that's why I say persistence and endurance, because it is an industry that can really like break you down. And if you're in it for the wrong reasons, if you're in it for the money or the fame or notoriety, whatever, that's the type of thing that will not get you to where you want to be. um yeah, that's all I have
Awesome.
to say about
I
that. Yeah.
I think that's an hour. We can just finish it here if you want, unless you want
Yeah.
to talk about something or you want to add anything or plug in something.
No, I have nothing to plug, man. We're between album cycles right now. My last record came out 3 years ago, and I'm just happy to meet people and talk to them, man. I have a lot of things on my mind that I feel like a lot of people might resonate with, and I want to see a lot of change, and I hope anyone listening kind of agrees with that and is on board with what I'm saying, that they'd like to see a change too. Um, and like I said, I want the next generation to reach the potential that even I myself like will not be able to reach.
Hmm.
There is an end date. It's an inevitable where I'll have to tap out. I'm 30. I don't want to be doing this when I'm 40 years old, and
Isn't Diplo like 40?
see that I always use that example. I don't want to be 40 playing in Vegas or anything like that. I'm trying to settle down and like not do that at that age. I'd love to be a producer like behind the scenes and work on music, but I don't want to be touring. I want to see the next generation really take it to where I I was unable to, and I'd like to be a part of that like process of being either a mentor or just like helping as much as I can and trying to open doors for them as much as possible. Um, and yeah,
Awesome. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it. Thank you.